There are moments in television that stop being television, when the studio lights and the scoreboards and the applause signs all fade into the background, and what's left is just two people, and something true passing between them. This was one of those moments. Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over a decade. He had made people laugh until they couldn't breathe. He had handed over prize money and hugged strangers and kept the energy moving through thousands of tapings. But on a Tuesday afternoon in February 2024, Steve Harvey stood in the middle of his own stage and broke down completely. Not because of a game, not because of a prize, because a 63-year-old man from Memphis, Tennessee, turned around and saw his daughter, a daughter he had not seen in 11 years, walking toward him across that stage. And she was saying his name. What brought this family to that moment, and how a game show stage became the place where 11 years of silence finally ended, is a story about pride, regret, and the love that refuses to die even when everything else has. Walter Grimes was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, the third of 5 children in a household held together by his mother's determination and his father's long hours at the rail yard. He grew up understanding that love was not always spoken. It was shown through showing up, through working, through making sure the people who depended on you never went without. He carried that understanding into his own family. He married his wife, Carol, when he was 27. They had 3 children together, 2 sons, Darnell and Calvin, and a daughter, Simone, who came last, and who, from the very beginning, had a different kind of energy in the house. Where the boys were steady and predictable, Simone was curious and restless. She asked questions that made Walter uncomfortable. She pushed against the edges of things. She was, as Walter would later admit in a voice that held equal parts love and regret, too much like me to get along with me. The falling out between Walter and Simone happened the way most family ruptures happen, not in a single catastrophic moment, but through a slow accumulation of smaller ones. A disagreement about her career choices, an argument about a relationship he disapproved of, a conversation that went too far in both directions, and then 11 years ago, a door that closed and did not open again. Walter told himself in the years that followed that he had done nothing wrong, that Simone had been the one to walk away, that his pride was not the problem. He told himself this so many times and so consistently that he almost believed it. Almost. He still kept her school photograph on his dresser. He still slowed down whenever he drove past the park where she used to play as a child. He still, every year on her birthday, sat quietly in his chair for a few minutes and did not explain to anyone why. Carol knew. Carol always knew. And it was Carol who had contacted Family Feud's producers 8 months earlier, not just with an application for a family game show appearance, but with a letter. A letter explaining that her husband and her daughter had not spoken in 11 years, that both of them were too proud to reach out first, and that she believed with everything she had that if they could just be in the same room again, the rest would take care of itself. She had not told Walter what she had arranged. She had simply told him they were going on Family Feud as a family. Him, her, Darnell, Calvin, and a family friend. He had agreed because Carol asked him to, and because Walter Grimes, for all his stubbornness, had never been able to say no to his wife. What he did not know was that Simone, who now lived in Chicago, who worked as a pediatric nurse, who had her own apartment and her own life and her own quiet sadness about a father she still loved, had also said yes. The Grimes family taped their episode on a Tuesday. Walter, Carol, Darnell, Calvin, and a family friend named Marcus took the stage as normal contestants. They played well. Walter, it turned out, had a sharp instinct for crowd survey answers, the kind of practical, no-nonsense thinking that had served him through 40 years of working and providing. The Grimes family won the main game. Steve Harvey ran his usual pre-fast money banter with Walter at center stage, and within about 90 seconds it was clear that these two men were going to get along. Walter was dry and understated in a way that made Steve work for the laughs, which made the audience love him. They were laughing. The energy in the room was light. Then Steve paused. He had been briefed on what was coming, but even knowing it in advance did not fully prepare him for the weight of it. Walter, Steve said, shifting his tone just slightly, before we get to fast money, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Walter looked at him. I'm always honest. I know you are, that's why I'm asking. Steve held his gaze. Is there anything in your life, anything at all, that you wish had gone differently? Something you'd take back if you could? The studio went quiet. The question had come out of nowhere, and it landed with a weight that the audience seemed to feel without fully understanding why. Walter was quiet for a moment, a long moment for a man who was rarely quiet. His jaw worked slightly. He looked at Carol, who was standing with the family, and Carol was looking at the floor. Yeah, Walter said finally. His voice was even but quieter than it had been. There is. You want to tell me about it? Walter took a slow breath. And then, haltingly, in the measured sentences of a man who was not used to saying such things out loud, he told Steve Harvey about Simone. He told him about how they used to be close when she was small, how she used to wait by the window when he came home from work, how she had her mother's laugh but his stubbornness, and how that combination had made her spectacular and impossible all at once. He told him about the argument. He did not make himself the hero of the story. He said plainly that he had been proud and that pride had cost him. "Do you miss her?" Steve asked. Walter looked straight ahead. "Every day," he said, "every single day." There was not a sound in that studio. Carol, standing a few feet away, had her hand over her mouth. Darnell and Calvin were both very still. Marcus stared at the floor. Nobody moved. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Walter, I want you to know something. Love doesn't expire. It doesn't matter how long the silence has been. It doesn't go away just because we stop talking." He paused. "What if I told you that you didn't have to miss her anymore?" Walter's expression changed. Something behind his eyes shifted, not understanding yet, but sensing. "What do you mean?" Steve Harvey looked past him toward the back of the stage. "Simone," he said, "come on out." Walter Grimes turned around slowly, the way a man moves when his body is not yet sure his heart can take what his eyes are about to see. And there was Simone. She was 34 years old now. She wore a deep green blouse and small silver earrings. She walked toward her father with her hands clasped in front of her, steady and careful, the way you walk when you are trying not to fall apart before you reach the person you need. Walter made a sound. It was not a word. It was something older than words, a low, broken exhale that came from somewhere deep in his chest. He took one step toward her, and then his composure, which he had maintained through a decade of birthdays and empty chairs and photographs on a dresser, gave way completely. He opened his arms and Simone walked into them, and Walter Grimes held his daughter and wept. Not quietly, fully. His shoulders shook. His voice, when it came, was barely a voice at all. He kept saying her name. Just her name over and over, pressed into her hair. Simone was crying too, but she was also talking, murmuring something into his shoulder, her arms tight around him. The microphone caught it faintly, and it became the moment that would stop the internet for 48 hours. She said, "Dad, I never left. I was always right here." Steve Harvey, who had positioned himself a few steps to the side to give them space, turned away from the camera for a moment. His hand went to his face. The audience could see his shoulders drop. When he turned back, he was not trying to hide that he had been crying. Carol reached her sons, and all three of them held each other quietly while Walter and Simone stayed in their embrace at center stage. The audience was on its feet, not making noise initially, just standing, the way people stand when something happens that feels too large for applause. And then, gradually, the applause came, and it built into something that lasted a long time. Steve Harvey eventually walked back to the center of the stage. He looked at Walter, who had pulled back slightly from Simone but was still holding her hand with both of his, the grip of a man who was not letting go again. Then he looked at the camera. "I have been doing this show for a long time," Steve said, "and I have never, not once, been more grateful to have this job than I am right now." He paused. "Because this is what Family Feud is actually for, not the money, not the answers, this, right here." "Family," he turned to Simone. "Young lady, tell me 11 years is a long time. What made you say yes when we called?" Simone looked at her father when she answered. "Because he's my dad," she said simply. "That never changed. I was just waiting for the door to open." The Grimes family finished the taping. Walter stepped up to the Fast Money podium, and the audience cheered for him the way audiences cheer for someone they have just watched be broken open and made whole again. He did not get a perfect score. He got 3 out of 5 top answers, enough to bring the family total to a solid prize. He was calm and focused, and when the final answer was revealed and the family celebrated, it was Simone standing beside him, holding his arm that the cameras kept returning to. When the episode aired 9 weeks later, the reaction was unlike anything the show had seen in years. The clip of Walter turning around and seeing Simone, 12 seconds of unscripted, unpolished, completely real human feeling, became the most shared video on social media for 3 consecutive days. It was not the reunion itself, commentators noted, that made it so powerful. It was what Simone said into her father's shoulder. 7 words. "Dad, I never left. I was always right here." People wrote about those 7 words in ways that surprised everyone, including Simone herself. Parents who had estranged children sent the clip to their families. Children who had not spoken to their fathers in years sent it to each other. Therapists shared it with clients. Teachers showed it in family counseling classes. The clip became, in a short time, a kind of shorthand for the possibility of repair, proof that the gap, however wide, could be crossed. Walter and Simone did not pretend that 11 years could be undone in a single afternoon. They were honest about that in the interviews they gave together in the weeks following the airing. "We have work to do," Walter said in a segment on a Memphis local news station. We missed a lot. I have to earn back time I threw away, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Simone, asked what she wanted people to take from their story, said something that her mother would later have printed and framed. Pride is the most expensive thing a family can own, she said. It costs you everything and it gives you nothing. Put it down, just put it down and reach for the person instead. Walter began driving to Chicago once a month. The first visit was quiet and careful. The second was easier. By the fourth, he was sitting at Simone's kitchen table while she made coffee, and they were talking about small things, her work, his garden, a movie Carol had been trying to get him to watch for years. The ordinary accumulation of a relationship being rebuilt, one ordinary moment at a time. Steve Harvey addressed the reunion on his talk show 2 months after the episode aired. He said something that stayed with the people who heard it. That man stood on my stage and told the truth about himself in front of strangers on national television. He said I was wrong and I paid for it. Do you know how hard that is? That took more courage than anything I've ever seen on a game show. He paused. And because he did that, he got his daughter back. Let that sit with you. Carol Grimes, who had spent 8 months quietly orchestrating the most important thing she had ever done for her family, gave only one interview. She was asked how she had known it would work. She said she hadn't known. She had just known that the alternative, doing nothing, letting it continue, was no longer something she could accept. I decided, she said, that somebody in that family had to stop waiting for the other person to go first, so I went first. 1 year after the taping, the Grimes family returned to Atlanta for a follow-up segment. Walter and Simone walked onto that stage together. He had one arm around her shoulders. She was laughing at something he had just said. The audience recognized them before Steve Harvey had said a single word, and the standing ovation began before they had even reached the center of the stage. Steve asked Walter what the last year had been like. Walter was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on his daughter's shoulder. The best year of my life, he said, because she was in it. He looked at Simone, and she looked back at him, and the studio was very quiet for a moment. Then Steve Harvey, who had learned something from this family about the things that actually matter, nodded once and said, "That's the right answer, Walter. That's the #1 answer." And it was.